All right, we're going to be in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9. We are in the middle of kind of a long, 9-month-long series that we are walking through the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus' longest, kind of most famous passage. And today, as we're getting into this, I want us to try to pretend the best we can that we were there when we heard these words. And I know there's a lot of barriers, there's a lot of cultural barriers to kind of thinking about what life would be like being there. But I want us to try to pretend like we were actually there. And today, I want you to pretend that as you're hearing this, you're about 90 years old. Okay? Now, my good friend, who I meet with every week, is north of that number. And it's not hard for him to imagine. But for a lot of us, that might be a bit of a challenge. But for the sake of hearing these words from Jesus, I want us to imagine that we're about 90. So you're 90, and you've lived your whole life in Jerusalem. Okay, so I just want you to picture what this is like. It's a smaller town. Jerusalem at this point is probably around 50,000 people, right around there. Now that number will swell significantly based on whether it's Passover, based on what religious holidays are happening. But the base of it's about 50,000 people, I believe, kind of in the city. And it's a smaller city. Geographically, I don't remember, honestly, somewhere 200 to 400 acres maybe. Think of Corvallis population without college kids in a smaller area. When you were born, if you were 90 hearing these words from Jesus, when you were born into a very unique time in Israel's history because you actually did not have a foreign power over you. And this was one of the first times. There was about a 100-year period there, but you were born into this time without a foreign power over you. And so you would think that this would be a time of peace, right? Like, we don't have the Greeks over us. We don't have the Persians over us. We don't have the Babylonians over us. It's just us. Well, just being us, we're really good at creating our own chaos. And we're in the middle of what's beginning to be a civil war. There was a king and queen. The king dies. The queen, Salome Alexandra, she is queen. She has 2 sons. As she is dying, she points one son to be the heir to the high priest position and the other son to be the heir to the throne, the king. Mom dies. Again, this is right around the time that you're born. Mom dies. One of the sons, for whatever reason, kind of usurps the position, and the other son is relegated to prince, and one son now holds the position of high priest and king. This starts what would be a multi-year feud, which ultimately is going to lead to civil war. This civil war is fueled by both of these sons aligning with 2 of the major religious kind of political parties of the day. One of the sons was part of the Pharisee group, and the other son was part of the Sadducee group. And the son who became prince started making allies with people, and he's like, hey, I want to find my position within the kingdom. And so he leaves the nation, goes down to the Arabian Peninsula, makes some alliances over there, brings a 50,000-person army up to Jerusalem. Half the city was for him. And so they open up the gates, come on in, we want to oust these other people, we want to oust your brother. And as they're doing that, half the city flees to the temple, which is just a little bit outside the city. So you've got this Arabian army with half of your city, and then the other half is kind of hiding in this fortified temple, if you will. You can imagine what that would be like growing up in that town. This is happening right as you're born. I don't know what's happening to mom and dad. And there's a bit of a stalemate that happens between this standoff. The temple was fairly fortified, and you have this army here, and it's happening in the spring. And I believe that there was kind of this moment where these huge sandstorms happen, and so the fighting ceased for a bit. And both sides are trying to figure out how do we win. And so both sides, interestingly enough, they make an appeal to Rome, who is rising in power in their region. Both parties are like, hey, can we buy Roman power to come in and help us help our side win? Rome eventually takes the side of one of them, and Rome comes in, and again, half the people in the city welcome them into the city. Actually, Rome kicks out the Arabs, so the 50,000 people flee. But now Rome, under the army of Pompey, this is right in 63 BC, Rome now surrounds the temple. What ensues is a 3-month siege on the temple. Rome brought in about 10,000 soldiers, and after 3 months, the walls were fortified, or they were broken into. 12,000 temple guards were killed, and Rome now has established authority and control over the city. So that's what you were kind of born into. Rome now has authority over the city for the next about 20 years, about 17 years or so. It's not a strict control over the city yet, but they definitely have control over the city. And so you're growing up. You've got a foreign kind of power over you in your kind of like your early childhood into your teen years. And then something happens when you are, let's just say you're about to get married. You're about 20 years old. You're excited, this big moment. You've been looking forward to it for a while. Your families have figured out who you're going to marry. And it's about that day. And then comes another army. The Parthians. And then in your city is another massive war. The Parthians kick out the Romans, and they establish authority here. Now, again, small city, not a lot of people. Think through what it's going to be like to be 20, living through a foreign army coming in, slaughtering the government, doing whatever they want with your wives, indoctrinating your children. Now they have power over your city. While this was happening, there was a guy by the name of Herod. Some of you guys might remember that name. Herod flees Jerusalem, and he goes all the way back to Rome, and he tells Rome, hey, there's these people, the Parthians, who've taken over this jurisdiction of ours. Can I have an army to go back down and to kind of reestablish our authority there? And that's what this guy Herod does. He gets this army from Rome, and he moves his way, and it's a long distance going from Rome all the way down to Jerusalem. He takes this army, and city after city, as he works his way through northern Israel, conquers, establishes Roman rule, eventually gets to Jerusalem, and ultimately this army kicks out the Parthians, slaughters the king, kills anyone who they want to in their path, and now Rome has set up a new form of government in your city. Again, imagine what this is like. This happens in 37 BC. What is this like now? You're trying to figure out, how do I live in the city? Probably at this point, realistically, you wouldn't be alive. You would have been killed, probably, but let's just say you happen to make it alive. Most of the people that you probably grew up with were killed in one of these battles. If you are still alive, you're insanely frustrated. You don't know a lot of peace. And now you have strict Roman rule under Herod overseeing your city. We've talked a little bit as we kind of introed into the Sermon on the Mount what this strict Roman rule kind of entailed. I'll remind us of 3 major components of this Roman rule, starting with high taxes. Right? So Rome's like, well, we're not just down here for nothing, and we're not just going to send money from Italy to fund all this. You guys are going to fund this. And so you have exorbitant taxes amongst the people. You have a lot of tension between the Romans who are living there, living kind of these opulent, high lifestyles, funded by the poverty of these people who've had everything stripped away from them. A lot of their resources are just out, they're gone, they're stripped, they're taken away to other places. And you have the tension of the Jews actually tax collecting their own people kind of in bed with Rome, and that's super painful, right? We talked about the fact that Matthew, the writer of this gospel, was one of those tax collectors. You have strict Roman, not just rule through taxes, but you have kind of the dominance of Rome through power as seen through regular beatings and as seen through public executions. right? And this public execution is something that happened regularly. This isn't just Jesus dying on the cross. This was a normal activity, and they would do it in the most excruciating way possible, putting people on crosses, letting them die publicly at eye level, staying alive for about 3 days, right? And so this was a normal thing that you would see in your city growing up. I don't know if you had a family member, maybe a son, who was killed in this way. Like maybe you stood up to some tax collector, they didn't like you for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know what that would have been like, but I promise you it wouldn't have been easy. After a number of years, and then you have Roman kind of rule over your worship, right? So when that first Herod came in, he starts a 46-long-year rebuilding project of the temple, kind of as a token to, hey, I'm on your side, I'm on your team. But in the process of doing so, like brings in pagan worship, brings in Roman gods, and really doesn't let Jews practice worship as they long to. And so there's just a ton of tension in living all this. Eventually, this Herod dies, and a number of his sons take over, all named Herod, not confusing at all. They take over different regions of Israel, but this continued strict Roman rule is what you are living in. Not only that, but your own people are religiously and politically divided. Some of you might have read this in your journal introductions, but you had 4 kind of major parties. You had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots. And each one of these people groups, they thought that their way was the way to do it, and there was a lot of fighting even within the Jewish people. And so you're going to hear these words today from Jesus, having grown up in a time that was anything but peaceful. You're 90 years old and your whole life has been turmoil. The city that you lived in has been turned upside down many, many times. Very likely a lot of people you grew up with. I mean, if you're 90, you probably outlived a lot of them. But not just because of age, but because of harshness and reality of foreign power over you. And you've seen a lot of fighting within your own people. And then here comes Jesus today. You're hearing these words. I don't know how many people were listening. There's debate on that. Some say it was a few. Most say somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people based on a lot of things, primarily based on the location and based on the description of some of the other times that Jesus teaches, and they actually talk about how many people were there. But I want us to listen to the description of this kind of preceding moment, and then we're going to listen to the one verse. So here, just kind of be thinking about the reputation of Jesus, and then we're going to get into what he says today. And I'm doing my best to have a shorter sermon today, so we can have some time in this. So here we go. This is chapter 4, verse 24, just kind of setting the scene of expectations as you're hearing Jesus. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. So he is gaining a lot of popularity, Jesus is. You've heard about him. You're excited. You've been living in a lot of hardship. You're hoping maybe my kids or grandkids will be able to live a life that I never was able to live. Maybe someone will finally bring peace. And then we get to our text for today. And I'm going to ask, we're just going to read one sentence. Would you stand with me as we read this word today? I'm going to read it today. When I'm done, I'm going to say, this is the word of the Lord. And you can say, thanks be to God. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can grab a seat. So if you're hearing this and you grew up, what are you thinking in this moment? If I'm hearing this, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking a lot of different things, but I'm thinking a few things. The first thing I'm thinking is, isn't the blessed life when I actually have peace from all my enemies? Why is Jesus talking about being a peacemaker? Why isn't he saying, blessed is the person who has peace? And I'm also thinking, I know a lot of people who need to hear this message, right? Namely Rome, namely my super annoying Pharisee brother-in-law, because I'm a Sadducee. Like, it'd be great if they could hear this message. But is this message actually for me? And if it is for me, what does that mean? Right? Does it mean that now I'm supposed to stand up to Rome and be some sort of peacemaker? Does this mean that in my politically divided family, I'm supposed to be a peacemaker? What does this actually mean for me? And why would Jesus say, blessed is the person who's committed to being a peacemaker? Right? And we hear that today, right? What does it mean for us? Peacemaking, right? We come in and my guess is, for most of us, our life probably isn't as rough as if you grew up in Jerusalem. But everything's relative, and we probably come in with enough of our own stuff, and we probably come in with some sort of longing that, man, I would feel blessed if God actually just kind of eliminated some of my major problems or tensions in life, right? Maybe that's why some of us came to church today thinking, hey, if I can just meet Jesus somehow, then for whatever reason, maybe he will bring peace into my life, and I'd really like peace in my life, and now I'm hearing that I'm supposed to actually be someone who brings peace. Now, what does that mean? What does it look like? What does it look like for us? Right? And why be a peacemaker? And can I be a peacemaker if I don't actually have peace myself? And what does it actually mean to have peace myself? Can I have peace while living in a place like Jerusalem? Can I have a peace while living in a rocky marriage? Right? Can I have peace while living in a work situation that's really stressful? Can I have peace where health situation is anything but ideal? Right? What does this look like? I want to briefly look at kind of 4 postures of peace. You're going to want to take notes on just the titles of these because I can't even remember them. So here we go. There are peace takers, there are peace fakers, there are peacekeepers, and there are peacemakers. We're going to talk about each one of these briefly today, and then we're just going to sit and ask God, how am I supposed to be like you? Someone who is blessed when I bring peace. I'll start out with this. Every one of us wants peace. It's probably the deepest longing in the hearts of men. Like, we want to be at peace. Now, there's a lot of different definitions of what that means, but ultimately, we all want that. And so how do we get that? And what does that look like? Let's look at these 4 different postures. I'll start out with the opposite. Some of us are peace takers. I got a little picture I want to throw up here. I opened up my fridge earlier this week, and I saw this box. And if you can't read it, it says, Whitney's Only. It's a crumble cookie box. This is my daughter, and she says, that means you, Dad. Now, my daughter knows that I love cookies. I love ice cream. I love all kinds of things sweet. And I opened this up, and I had a lot of thoughts that flooded my mind. Now, to be a peace taker, what would I do in this situation? I got a lot of options. Number 1, I could just take a bite and put it back and not say anything. Ultimately, she would find out, which is why I'm guessing she put that sign up on the first place, because it may or may not have been the first time that that's ever happened. I could also do what some of us are tempted to do in situations like this. I could manipulate my way into getting what I want. Right? I could say something like, hey, Whitney, a couple of weeks ago in Sunday school when Mr. Waffle came, and he taught you about the kids in Africa, and they had a bowl of fruit, and they shared it with all of their friends. They didn't take it for themselves. I actually started to say this to her in jest, and I was like, no, Whitney, this is yours. Like, I'm not going to take it. But I think you know where I'm going with this. Some of us do this in life, right? We know that there are things that other people don't want us to do, or there are things that we want in life, and we use, you name it, logic, reason, emotion, manipulation to get what we want, and we can stomp on other people's feelings, right? And we can bend things to make people feel bad if they don't give us what we want. Right? I would call those people peace takers. And yes, there's a whole lot more that we could talk about in terms of peace takers, but I would just ask us, am I a peace taker? Right? Do I love, Thanksgiving's coming up. And you think about the different conversations that we're going to have if we gather with people. And peace takers are the ones who kind of just walk into a situation and they'll just drop something just to watch it. Like, man, aren't you glad Trump won? And they'll just drop that and they'll just see what happens, right? They'll say something like, oh, man, I can't believe the economy this. They'll say something like, can you believe electric cars this? Like, whatever it is. And they don't even necessarily have to care about the issue. It's just like, I just want to stir the pot because I think it's fun to watch, right? You might have an uncle that just goes off because you know. Is my family alone in this? There's an easy temptation to be a peace taker. We can do this in a lot of ways, and we can do this in a lot of ways that are far more malicious than a stupid cookie, right? We can take peace from people so easily in ways that are so cruel. So we're just talking to the opposite peace takers. Some of us are peace fakers. Now, what do I mean by a peace faker? I mean, this is someone who sticks their head in the sand and who pretends that there isn't hard things happening. And there's like, I just want peace in my life. I'm not going to face reality. I'm literally just going to la, my life is good right now, right? And what happens sometimes with people in this place is bad things will happen to them or they'll see it, and then they'll just make excuses as if, well, maybe it really wasn't that bad. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I misunderstood them, and we're always making excuses to try to bring peace. Right? And we're never actually dealing with the feelings. We're never actually dealing with the thoughts. We don't want to think that there are bad things that are happening. We just avoid it altogether. We fake the peace. So this is someone who's like, when it's time for this gathering that's going to happen with our family or friends, we're just literally not going to go because I want to pretend that everything's okay. And if I don't go, I don't know what's wrong. Right? If I don't have the conversation, I don't want to know what's wrong. I really just don't even want to know. Right? A peace faker is someone who grew up in Jerusalem. Is like, you know what? I can get out of all this. I can move outside the city. I can start my own farm-to-table stand and just live my life and pretend like everything's okay. Right? I'm never going to turn on the news. I'm never going to have any real conversations with people because I just want to pretend that I have peace. Are you a peace faker? It's not there, but you want it to be there. The cousin of peace faker is peacekeeper. A peacekeeper is someone who sees peace as like the ultimate thing to have and aren't willing to dive into the hard conversations simply just to keep the peace. Like it frustrates you when bad things happen. You don't ignore them. You don't hide from them, but you don't do anything about them. So at that same Thanksgiving table, when you're hearing something, like you're raging on the inside, but you're like, I'm going to keep the peace. I'm not actually going to say anything. Right? In a marriage, this may happen when one spouse is doing things that are really hurtful, but you're afraid if you bring something up that it's just going to escalate all the more. And so you're like, you know what? It's hurtful, it's painful, but I just want to keep the peace. I want to enjoy this day. I want to enjoy this vacation. I want to enjoy this meal, whatever it is. I'm just going to keep the peace. And I'm not going to rock the boat. I don't want to hurt the feelings. I'm just going to keep the peace. Some of us are peacekeepers, right? This would be like my daughter, if I was mean enough to take a bite of that cookie after she asked me not to, this would be like her being really hurt that I did that and not saying anything because she's afraid that I'm going to make it her fault or I'm going to overreact, right? And again, silly example, but I think we're smart enough to recognize how that fleshes out in the real world. Are you a peacekeeper? Lastly, Jesus calls us to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Now, the difference between a peacemaker than any of these other things is peacemakers, they go into the hard conversations. They enter into the deep, and it's really hard, and it always takes conflict. Right? There's never a moment where you can create real peace without some sort of conflict. Right? So in the cookie analogy, this would be my daughter standing up for herself. This would be my wife coming in if I took a bite and saying, hey, Dad, what you did was really hurtful. Why did you do that? Why did you try to exercise your power? I asked you to do something, it was hurtful, right? And it's risky because what if I overreact? And if I do, like, we got to try to bring peace here, right? This is a commitment that is not simple. It's incredibly challenging, and it always creates conflict. So here you're hearing this from Jesus for the first time. You're 90 years old. You've lived in a place of nothing but conflict. And he's saying, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Well, what does it look like to bring peace? Right? In that world, what did that look like? What does it look like in our homes? Right? What does it look like in our families? I think this is one of the harder immediate challenges to be a peacemaker. And ultimately, where does this all come from? Jesus says, you will be called the sons of God. Ultimately saying, you will be like God if you do this. And why is that? That's because our faith rests on the truth that starts with conflict. Right? The conflict. I'm going to read Ephesians 2, and then we're going to kind of sit in this, and I'm going to give us some time here. Ephesians 2 says this about conflict and about peace. Ephesians 2:13. He says, but now in Christ, you who once were far off, right? In other words, we had a war with God, right? Through sin, like through us saying, I'm going to live my life however I wanted, that causes conflict with God. We've been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace. And he might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. Jesus went to the cross to kill hostility. Him going to the cross was insanely costly. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, right? There's a way to have peace with God and peace to those who are near. For through him, we both have access in one spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. By our nature and by our choice, we rebelled against God. We created conflict. And God, here's what he could have done. God could have been someone who's like, I'm just going to keep the peace. I'm going to let you live your life. I'm going to live mine. I don't want this to be very costly to me. I don't want it to be costly for my son. I'm just going to do my thing. You're doing what you want to do anyways. Right? He could have just left it that way. But he made it his life. He says, no, I'm giving my son. It's going to cost everything, and that's the only way to bring peace. It's the only way is to get into the middle of conflict. And when Jesus died, he gave us that peace. And now he asks us, hey, I want you to go be like me in the world. Right? I want you to be like me. And so our challenge for us is, what does it mean to be like him? What does it mean to be a peacemaker? Right? In your home, in your family, it's going to be different for every single person. Right? Some of us, you know what? Like our immediate family, maybe everything is at peace. And so maybe you're going like, I don't know, everything's great in my family. Well, then look outside your family. Right? Because there's places where peace needs to be. Right? Maybe you're in the middle of a war at your family and all you can handle is the war that's in front of you. And you know what? That's okay. Like let's get after that. What does it mean to be a person of peace? To be a person who brings peace, I'll say this as I kind of try to land the plane and give us some time here. We have to have peace with God first. If you try to be a peacemaker without having peace with God first, like it's an exhausting, tiring effort that ultimately will not give you the peace that you long for. Right? Because all our efforts in bringing peace, sometimes they will work and sometimes they won't. Right? But the ultimate peace we have is peace with God, and that's what we're ultimately trying to get after. And so I'm going to lead us into a time of reflection. The band's going to come up. We're going to have a little bit longer time, I hope, in our journals. And I'm going to ask us a few questions as I pray here. Father God, we're sitting before you, and I just want us to be honest and say, hey, where is my proclivity and my tendency? Is my proclivity to be a peace taker? God, is it easier when I'm just not around? Am I an instigator? Am I an antagonizer? Am I a peace faker? Do I just want to stick my head in the sand? Do I just want to pretend? I don't want to deal with it. It's too painful. I don't even want to think that pain is real. Life's good. Or do we have tendencies to be peacekeepers? God, I'm not going to stir up any of the hard stuff. I'm just trying to give peace in the moment. God, but ultimately you call us to be peacemakers. That word is only used one time in the whole Bible, and it's not just being at peace, but it's bringing your peace. It's actively being someone who is making peace, and it always causes tension. God, where are you asking us to be peacemakers? And God, where are you asking us to be bold in that? And that boldness might be one small step this week. God, if someone's trying to make peace with us, I pray that we would recognize that, hey, we were at war with you and we have a proclivity towards being at war with other people, and that I need to receive sometimes that, you know what, maybe I need to bring peace. Maybe I need to be at peace because I'm causing hardship for other people. Lord, help us to be honest in our thoughts in response to you. Yeah, we love you, Jesus. Take this time, write in your journal, write in that note, be between you and the Lord.